Okay, this is a review of Chapter 7, Psychological Trait Theories of Crime. So in this chapter, we're going to identify general principles of psychoanalysis and how psychoanalysis applies to criminal behavior. We're going to talk about three dimensions of associated with Hans Eysenck theory of crime and personality, talk about some key stages of moral development, attachment theory, all sorts of other stuff. Okay, let's jump in. So early psychological theorizing regarding criminal behavior was really based on Freud and his model of the psyche and the implications for criminal behavior that come from that model. So Freud originates psychoanalysis, which is founded on the perception of resistance used by people when therapists attempt to make them conscious of their unconscious mind. So the psychoanalytic perspective is complex and extremely systematized. So first, an individual's behavior is presumed to be due to three aspects of their personality: their id, their ego, and their superego. So the id is the instinctual drives, everything present at birth. Basically, two types of instinctual drives. You have the libido, right, to reproduce, the sexual drive. Also, other instinctual drive is destruction. This refers to aggression, death, destruction. The ego is the moderator between the id, or the demands of your instincts, and the superego and reality. So the ego characterizes what's referred to as reason and sanity, while the id is more like passion. So in the id, there's no conflicts, whereas in the ego, conflicts between impulses need to be resolved. So the superego is designated as your conscience. So this evolves during the course of your development as you learn the rules, what we call the norms or the mores or values of a society. So another key aspect of this is anxiety, which, anxiety, defense mechanisms, and the unconscious are also key principles that, as far as anxiety, this is considered a warning of looming danger of or a painful experience. And this results in the individual attempting to correct the situation. In most instances, the ego can cope with anxiety through rational measures. But when that doesn't work, the ego uses irrational measures, like rationalizations, where you use your ego defense mechanisms. So Freud maintained that a large part of the ego and superego can remain unconscious. It takes a lot of effort for an individual to realize they're kind of conscious, even that they even exist, and their unconscious mind that might be filled with urges or disturbing memories or other things that they want to repress or keep away from the conscious mind. So until the unconscious experiences are brought to the awareness of the individual, then they can often engage in irrational or destructive behavior because they're not dealing with what's going on in their unconscious mind. Okay, moving on to Acorn, he attempted to apply psychoanalysis to uncover unconscious motives in juveniles engaging in delinquent behavior. And so he distinguished between manifest and latent delinquency. So delinquency is considered manifest when it results in antisocial behavior. And latent delinquency is when the same state of mind exists but has not expressed itself in behavior yet. Okay, moving on to good old Hans. So his theory of crime personality was developed, again, linking personality to criminality. And he did this by saying that the human personality can be viewed in three dimensions. And part of this came from his personality questionnaire that he developed to measure individuals on these three dimensions: psychotism, extrovertism, or extroversion, I should say, and neuroticism. So the first is when individuals are considered to have high psychoticism. This is associated with being aggressive or egocentric, selfish, impulsive jerk, basically. Someone who's cold and antisocial, who doesn't have empathy for others. And they might be very, stubborn. So individuals that have very low scores of psychotism are characterized as being empathetic, unselfish, peaceful, warm, pleasant, altruistic. And then moving on to extroversion. So this is associating traits of being sociable, lively, active, outgoing, basically, right? Assertive, carefree, and really sometimes kind of goes towards the realm of, sensation seeking or adrenaline-y, dominant, adventuresome, that kind of thing. Versus neuroticism is instability. It's linked with being anxious or depressed, guilty, low self-esteem, tense, irrational, moody, emotional, shy, that kind of stuff. So good old Hans maintained that individual differences in criminality can be understood in terms of biology. So he had 3 different ways that he argued this. The first was, genetics or heredity. Basically he did this by studying twins and seeing how, that was connected to the likelihood of committing crime. The second argument was more about Pavlovian conditioning. And so this is a big part of his biological explanation. So again, if you're not familiar with that kind of classical conditioning, it just means that behavior can be learned and that, it can be reproduced if encouraged, right? So if you're socialized and you learn to have altruistic behavior, this can be mediated by means of a Pavlovian conditioning. And this is more difficult to condition extroverts compared to introverts. So that was interesting. And then the last type of argument is based on brain physiology. So the differences between extroverted and introverted behavior, in his argument was the actual arousal or cortical arousal of the brain. So extroverts would have low levels of cortical arousal, so they're less susceptible to pain and punishment, and they experience less fear and anxiety. It's kind of like when we talk about sociopaths, psychopaths, that kind of idea that the wiring of the brain is just a little bit different, and so the way that they experience things can be different, which can then of course affect their likelihood of committing crime or how they experience that situation. What it kind of connects back to that psychoticism and how much your brain chemistry connects back to that. So there's been some mixed support for his model of personality and criminality. Individuals scoring high on psychoticism are often linked to criminal behavior regardless of methodology, but when employing self-report methods, extroversion is usually higher among the general population, but not among criminal offender samples. So that kind of goes against some of those findings. Okay, moving on to Lawrence Kohlberg's moral development theories. So he says that moral development occurs in stages. It evolves in children in a 3-level progression, and each level consists of 2 stages, right? So you have the pre-conventional level, and the first stage is to, be obedient to power in avoidance of punishment. Like your parents tell you do this or you're going to get a timeout, so you do what they say, right? Stage 2 of pre-conventional is, taking responsibilities and leaving others to be responsible for themselves. And then once you get to the conventional stage or the conventional level of moral development, stage 3 is, to be considerate and uphold the values of other people in society. And stage 4 under the conventional level is being good with the values and norms of family and society at large. And then once you move into the post-conventional stages, that's when you're finding your inner universal rights, your balance between what you want and what, society or the rules in society, the norms, the values tell you is okay to do, that social contract. And stage 6, the last stage within the post-conventional level, is based on a higher order of applying principles to all of people. So being non-judgmental, respecting all human life, caring for others even if they don't agree with you, things like that. So the idea is that how can this then, again, connect back to crime? Well, if people don't go through every level of this moral development, it can affect their integration into society and societal values, which then can impact their likelihood of committing crimes. Okay, moving on to attachment theory. You got Bowlby and Ainsworth. So we'll go through this a little bit. Bowlby formulated the basic propositions of the theory, and Ainsworth implemented some innovative methodologies to test those concepts. So basically, Bowlby says there's 7 essential features of the theoretical perspective, and they're all here on the slide: specificity, duration, engagement of emotion, course of development, learning, organization, and biological function. So what the hell does any of that mean? Okay, so starting with specificity. These are attachments, attachments are choosy, right? These are the attachments that focus on one or more individuals, usually with some order preference. Duration is how long an attachment is taking place. So let's say, you have an attachment like a best friend. Okay, is that best friend from this year, from when you were born, from kindergarten, right? Things like that, that duration would matter. Engagement of emotion is just some of the most intense and passionate emotions are associated with attached relationships, right? So you're much more likely to care deeply about what someone you love thinks than some just rando on the street and what they think, right? So, and course of development is really just referring to the first 9 months of an infant's life. They develop an attachment to a primary figure, and this is the one who provides the most fulfilling and pleasing social interactions. This might be a mother, this could be, anyone in the family form that's really caring for the child. Learning does have some influence on a person's attachments, but the key component here is learning social interaction, right? How do we learn? How do we even understand what language is or any of these things? It's really through social interactions with others that we develop who ourselves are. And so that's an important aspect of attachment theory. And organization is just that behavior follows cognitive development as well as interpersonal maturation from birth, right? That obviously, as you grow older, your relationships can evolve in a way. So for instance, with your own parents, as you're a baby, you're completely dependent on a parent. Once you hit like toddler or even school age, you're less dependent and you start to kind of push away a little bit. You hit your teen years, you push away, you develop your own identity. You hit your adulthood, you're like, poof, they don't know anything, blah, blah, blah. Then you hit your like mid-adulthood and then you realize like, oh yeah, no, they knew what they were talking about. And that kind of relationship can then also change as well. So it's one of those things, our relationships, we tend to think of them as quite static, but they're actually kind of like living, breathing things that continue to evolve as we do. And then biological function, what they meant from that was that attachment behavior has a biological function, meaning that, we're social creatures. We want to be attached to the group, and part of that comes from kind of a biological wiring in us that wants to keep us safe, right? There's a safety in numbers. And so as social creatures, we really seek out the comfort and connection with others. So anyway, basically attachment theory is really kind of drilling into this idea that if a person is attached, this can dramatically impact their likelihood of committing crimes, right? That, the more attached someone is with society, the more attached someone is to the moral value systems of the culture, the less likely they are to commit crimes. So I know chapter 7 also goes into the IQ again. We kind of already went through that, right, already in a previous lecture with Binet and Goddard and all that kind of crap, and then Hershey and Hindelang when they kind of circled back to it in the 70s. So I feel like we got through that. We don't really need to litigate that one again. And then there is some also talk in the chapter about, again, sociopaths and psychopaths. Sociopaths being the antisocial personalities that are due to social or familial distinction, while a psychopath refers to an individual whose antisocial behavior may be the result of a defect or abnormality within themselves, rather than a rearing or a socialization thing. So a psychopath, you can't really fix them in a way. That's the idea. Versus a sociopath, it might be like they encountered a traumatic event or a bad, environment. And that's kind of what made them who they are. So we will come back to discussing psychopaths and sociopaths later on. So I felt like we could kind of skip some of the implementation of that in this chapter.